The Midwest has always been home to me, and every morning I am so grateful to be able to share the stories of the awesome things that people are doing in our communities. I hope you'll join us tomorrow morning.
Now on Nightcast, crime on Metro Transit is up in the first half of the year, but the police chief says they're working to reverse the trend.
Confusion on the first day of recreational cannabis in Minnesota.
I don't see anything making it a crime to sell an immature plant.
The dispute outside a Faribault business surrounding the new law and why it may be just the beginning.
St. Paul has a law limiting how much rent can be raised on tenants, but there are exceptions. Tonight, the concern as new data shows most landlords who wanted an exemption got one.
Another setback for a proposed copper nickel mine in northern Minnesota. Why the Supreme Court says the MPCA must reconsider the permit it granted years ago. Nightcast starts right now.
And good evening, everyone. I'm Kevin Dorn.
And I'm Lindsay Brown. All those stories are just ahead, but first, Bryn Claire is here with your forecast first.
Good evening, you guys. Yeah, it was nice to see some rain earlier tonight. At this point, we're all dry, and we are looking at even mostly clear skies overnight, but a few fair weather clouds. Right now, we're at 82 degrees, and winds are light and variable, even just calm. And so with that, we have quite the range in temperatures as we cool off differentially here. 72 degrees right now in Hinckley, mid-70s in Hutchinson, mid-70s towards Mankato. It's quite humid across most of the state, but far northern Minnesota here tonight, you're going to be looking at a cold front moving in from the north, and that will track southward. With that, we'll start to build in some less humid air as well as slightly cooler air. Tomorrow, though, we're back into the low 90s. It still is going to be humid across central and southern Minnesota, and we have the chance for isolated storms, more so into the afternoon. I'll take a look at that timeline for storms and when you can expect temperatures back into the 70s even coming up in just a bit here. Guys?
Ren, thank you. And right now, this is a live look at the North Metro. A search is on for a man investigators say went underwater and did not resurface. The call came in around 8 o'clock to Bald Eagle Lake and White Bear Township. You can see a large law enforcement rescue crew presence there right now. We'll bring you more information when we get it at KSTP.com and in our free mobile app.
And now to an issue that we've been tracking on Nightcast for years. Safety on Metro Transit buses and light rail trains.
New data shows crime rates rose significantly the first 6 months of the year compared to the same time last year. But Metro Transit Police Chief Ernest Morales says progress has been made recently. Tonight, Jay Coles joins us live in St. Paul with more.
Lindsay, it's kind of a mixed bag of public safety news from Metro Transit today. Crimes like assaults, weapons, and drugs were up, as you mentioned, significantly for the first 6 months of 2023. But Chief Morales is quick to point out those same types of crimes also have gone down the past 3 months, and that's shortly after he became Chief of Police.
5 investigates found repeated instances of crimes out in the open on light rail lines in recent months. Everything from drugs to weapons and assaults. And the new transit police chief tells me there's a lot of work that needs to be done.
The real challenge is going to come in October when it gets colder again. But I feel by staying consistent, we'll keep control of the situation.
This safety update from Metro Transit shows crimes such as assaults, drugs, weapons, and theft increased more than 40% during the first 6 months of this year compared to the same time in 2022.
What's your reaction to the number of crime victims still being higher a year later?
Well, I'll tell you, it's a new challenge that we have to work around, and I get that this is a new system that we report to, and that's fine. I'm just working with the system, but I want everyone to understand it.
During the chief's presentation to the Met Council, some concern about the rising crime and other challenges was expressed.
We see the problems of drug use, homelessness, mental health issues throughout the region, and they are finding their way to our transit stations, trains, buses.
Chief Morales says there is a bright spot in all of this. Since he's been on the job at the beginning of March, he says there has been a decline in public transit crime. Chief Morales says it starts with officers getting out of their squads and interacting with people and working crime hotspots.
So we have them out in the system, getting out on their cars and being intentional about where we're putting them. We're seeing high crime areas take place in our historical areas, and we're assigning them there so that they can be visible.
You're still down from what you should be in terms of what you're budgeted for, right, in terms of officers?
Correct. We're currently down 65 sworn officers.
And now to add more officers, Chief Morales says they're in the middle of an aggressive recruiting campaign. They're looking here in the metro, outside the state, the region. He said even as far away as New York City to try to get cops to come here. Reporting live in St. Paul, Jay Coles, 5 Eyewitness News.
Tonight, activists and the family of Ricky Cobb II are calling for state troopers involved in Cobb's death to be fired and charged. They made the demands outside the Hennepin County Government Center. Cobb was shot and killed by a state trooper during a traffic stop on I-94 north of Minneapolis early Monday morning. Body camera of the incident was made public yesterday, showing troopers being dragged. Tonight, loved ones said Ricky Cobb was a family man.
My brother was a good man. He was a provider for all of us. He protected all of us.
Governor Tim Walz said he spoke to Cobb's family today and said he will get to the bottom of what happened.
It hasn't even been 48 hours since recreational marijuana became legal in Minnesota. And already businesses and law enforcement are butting heads over what products are okay to sell and what's not. This comes after police in Faribault seized nearly 24 plants from what they called a tent sale outside a tobacco shop. Richard Reeve explains the cannabis confusion and why it may just be the beginning.
In Faribault, a debate about whether these plants sold outside a tobacco shop and seized by police are legal.
Yesterday was the start of a new era for legalized marijuana.
Faribault police call these 22 plants suspected marijuana. Chief John Sherwin says even if they are not yet producing THC, the ingredient that makes a user high, they are what he calls an instrument of a potential crime.
The flower has not developed, the bud has not yet developed, but when it does, it's certainly going to be at a level that it exceeds that threshold.
It's a house plant that we're selling. There is no THC in the plant at this time.
Matt Little put these plants on the market. He's a founding partner of Nuquana, a Waseca-based licensed hemp company. He says he's consulted with his attorneys and has the right to sell non-flowering plants, which he calls hemp and 100% legal.
It is a hemp plant if it's under the 0.3% THC, and it's a marijuana plant as soon as it goes above that 0.3% THC.
To me, it's only to be expected that they're going to have to revisit this in the next legislative session to do some cleanup.
Tom Gallagher is an attorney with the Minnesota chapter of NORML, the group advocating the legalization of recreational marijuana. He says there is some confusion in the new marijuana law because it doesn't have specific language about immature marijuana plants.
When I look at the law, researching this afternoon, I don't see anything making it a crime to sell an immature plant.
Chief Sherwin notes that no one has been arrested and that his department is consulting with prosecutors about how to proceed in this case. Jill Todd, manager of the tobacco store, who says she is the distributor of the plants, says her attorneys told her she was doing nothing illegal.
I really hope that this sets a precedent so that there is more clear communication on what we are allowed to sell and what we are not.
Chief Sherwin says his officers went to the distribution site after receiving citizen complaints. Little, meanwhile, says at his distribution site in Mankato, police responded but allowed him to continue. Under the new law, you can use and possess cannabis if you're 21 or older, but you can't sell it. Licenses for businesses won't be issued for many months, Lindsay.
Likely just the beginning, Richard. Thank you. And an update to the Minnesota State Fair's policy regarding marijuana. The fair says smoking pot will not be allowed anywhere on the fairgrounds. The fair will still have designated smoking areas where you can use cigarettes and vapes.
A man prosecutors call Minnesota's Jeffrey Epstein is expected to be sentenced in federal court next week. In March, a jury convicted Anton Tony Lazaro of sex trafficking of minors. He's facing a minimum of 10 years in prison. But as investigative reporter Kirsten Swanson tells us, prosecutors want a much longer sentence.
The U.S. Attorney's Office is asking a federal judge to sentence Lazaro to 30 years behind bars. Prosecutors also argue the former political donor and strategist should pay thousands of dollars in restitution to his young victims.
In these newly filed court documents, prosecutors are making the case to send Tony Lazaro to prison for nearly as long as he's been alive. Almost 6 months ago, a jury convicted the 32-year-old of sex trafficking. The government's case centered around 5 minor victims who testified that Lazaro offered them hundreds of dollars in exchange for sex. Those victims, in letters to the court, argue his conduct is deserving of a, quote, very, very long sentence. One writing, "I just want justice so my 16-year-old self can heal. I know someday soon I'll be free again." Prosecutors say Lazaro used his wealth and privilege to commit these crimes as well as obstruct justice. In this latest court filing, attorneys argue those factors support a 30-year prison sentence. Erica McDonald is a former U.S. attorney.
I think the prosecution in this case is asking for what they believe to be a fair sentence based on the conduct that this defendant and the harm that he caused to these young victims.
Lazaro's defense team wants much less time in prison, arguing the court should stick to the minimum sentence of 10 years. The final decision, McDonald says, is left to the judge.
There are sentencing guidelines and there are statutes and rules that apply to what a fair sentence should be, but in the end, it's the judge's discretion as to what that sentence should be and will be.
Prosecutors are also asking the court to order Lazaro to pay $30,000 to the Domestic Trafficking Victims Fund. That's on top of restitution that will go directly to his victims. Sentencing is scheduled for a week from today. I reached out to Lazaro's attorney for comment this afternoon, but haven't heard back. Lazaro previously said he will appeal his conviction. Kristen Swanson, 5 Eyewitness News.
Environmentalists are celebrating tonight. A proposed copper-nickel mine in northern Minnesota is facing another setback. The Minnesota Supreme Court suspended a wastewater permit for the new Met project in Babbitt. It was originally proposed by PolyMet. The court said the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency did not consider the mine's risk to water quality. Friends of the Boundary Waters and environmental group praised the ruling.
Today is a victory for transparency in government and for respecting the Found in Black band's retained rights in northeastern Minnesota.
In a statement, New Range Copper Nickel says it's confident that the additional proceedings will confirm the project protects water quality for all and welcomes working with stakeholders on the permit.
Gunmen who attacked a Pittsburgh synagogue will be sentenced to death. Today, a federal jury recommended Robert Bowers be sent to death row for carrying out the deadliest anti-Semitic attack in U.S. history. In 2018, Bowers killed 11 people at the Tree of Life Synagogue. 7 others, including 5 police officers, were hurt. A judge will hand down that death sentence. That's expected to come on Thursday. Pop star Lizzo is accused of sexual harassment and creating a hostile work environment. The 3 former backup dancers detail claims in a lawsuit filed in Los Angeles this week. It claims Lizzo, who got her career started here in Minneapolis, pressured the dancers to touch nude performers at a club in Amsterdam and shamed a dancer for gaining weight before firing her. Lizzo has not commented on this lawsuit.
In St. Paul, a rule capping rent increases at 3% has been in place for more than a year, but there are exceptions.
Yeah, and we've learned more than 840 applications have been filed from landlords hoping to get an exception. As Callan Gray explains, a majority have been granted.
St. Paul's rent stabilization ordinance has brought hundreds of cases to Angie Weesey's office as the director of the city's Department of Safety and Inspections.
Everyone who walks in the door has a different level of understanding of the ordinance.
The path to this point was complicated. In November 2021, voters approved a 3% annual rent increase cap, which went into effect with some exceptions the following May. Since then, the city council has changed the ordinance to exempt new construction and affordable housing and allow higher rent increases if a tenant leaves the unit under what's defined as a just cause vacancy. That could be because they didn't pay their rent, violated their lease, or decided not to renew their lease.
We've been doing a ton of education with landlords, with owners.
Landlords seeking an increase between 3 to 8% typically go through a self-certification process, while those seeking an increase above 8% go through a staff determination process. From May 1st, 2022 until the end of June this year, about 30% of staff determination applications were granted. More than 81% of self-certification applications were granted. And so were more than 94% 3% of applications for a higher rent increase due to a just cause vacancy, which WEC says was mostly due to renters not renewing their lease.
If you think of 78,000 units in the city, I expected that number to be higher.
What has stood out to you most about the requests that you are receiving?
That just people want to comply. I think that there's this perception that people are constantly trying to skirt the system. But what we find is that people, they want to comply. They want to make sure that they're doing things the right way.
The first year of rent stabilization has been, I would say, really a mixed bag.
Margaret Kaplan is the president of Housing Justice Center, which was part of a coalition of local groups that wrote the original ordinance on the ballot.
One of the things that I am concerned about is just the sheer number of exemptions that are being granted. I'm also a little bit concerned about whether they are going through a process of, in particular, kind of auditing some of those self-certifications.
She questions how closely the city is reviewing all of the applications.
One of the things that's most troubling is we've seen a number of instances where we know there are persistent issues related to housing condition, civil rights issues within those buildings, and people are still being granted exemptions.
WEC tells us every application gets a baseline review.
The number one check we do on all applications is it a habitable building? Is it a habitable unit?
And now the city has to notify tenants when their landlord applies to raise the rent above 3%, with a window to appeal. Kaplan says she hopes to see more scrutiny moving forward.
There are challenges with the enforcement, and the exemptions created some additional challenges, but to not forget that people have rights that they would not otherwise have. This makes a huge difference in the lives of so many renters.
The city tells us there are 2 people in the DSI office dedicated to reviewing applications, and they're supported by the city attorney's office. The city council, meanwhile, has been handling appeals. So far, DSI data shows there have been 10 appeals filed as of the end of June. Most of those were filed by tenants, but there were a couple from landlords as well.
Really interesting look at really the first year of rent stabilization. Thanks, Callan.
Thank you, Callan. The cost to get your car repaired has jumped 20% since last year. The 2 big factors auto shops say are driving the spike.
And it's a hot and humid night for us, but I am tracking some changes on the way. I'll take a look at some more cool temperatures in your forecast up ahead.
I love them as a team. Chris and Megan just seem as if they are a brother-sister with their banter. When they bring Ken in it, sometimes they have me cracking up in the morning where I'm just dying of laughter. You guys bring it in the best way.